The transatlantic slave trade was not merely a system of commerce, but a war, an economic war waged upon the African continent. For over 4 centuries, this struggle endured as African rulers sought to preserve their dominion while European powers sharpened their cunning, adapting their methods to tighten their grip upon the trade in flesh. The wealth of Africa was drained, its strength sapped, and its people torn from their lands in untold numbers. This is the African-European slave trade war, a conflict not fought with armies upon open fields, but with gold, steel, and deception. The devastation of this war did not end with the closing of the trade routes. Its wounds festered long after, reshaping the political and economic foundation of Africa. The Jolof Empire, a federation of vassal states along the Senegambian coast, leveraged its strategic position to dominate inland and maritime trade routes. To the south, the Kabu Empire, a powerful Mandinka state that emerged from the Mali Empire, controlled key trade routes in Guinea-Bissau and southern Senegal. To the east, the Kingdom of Benin, renowned for its sophisticated urban planning and elaborate walls, managed its encounters with European traders on its own terms, refusing to submit to foreign dominance. Meanwhile, the militarized Kingdom of Dahomey expanded its influence through warfare and slave raids, while the Ashanti controlled key trade routes and gold markets. The Oyo, with its formidable cavalry and strategic positioning, dominated regional commerce. Further south, in Central Africa, the Kingdom of Ndongo and the Kingdom of Congo in present-day Angola became major centers of resistance and exploitation in the transatlantic slave trade. In the beginning, slavery in Africa looked similar to the systems found in Islamic empires, where enslaved individuals often served as household workers, soldiers, administrators, or artisans, and in many cases, they could integrate into society, earn their freedom, or even rise to positions of power. Some forms of slavery were temporary, such as debt servitude, where individuals or their families could be freed once a debt was repaid. However, the arrival of European traders drastically changed the scale and the nature of slavery, turning it into a large-scale, profit-driven industry. The increasing demand for captives fueled internal conflicts, as African kingdoms and warlords waged wars and raided villages to capture people for sale. While some African leaders profited from the trade, the long-term consequences were devastating, depopulating regions, destabilizing societies, and ultimately paving the way for European colonial rule. Along the Senegambian coast, the Jolof Empire emerged in the 14th century, forging a federation of vassal states that controlled trade between the Atlantic coast and the West African interior. The Wolof and Sera peoples played a central role in managing this commerce, acting as intermediaries between the inland markets of Mali and the emerging coastal trade networks. Unlike the centralized rule of Mali and Songhai, Jolof operated as a loosely unified federation, where local rulers governed their own territories while paying tribute to a central leader, the Berber Jolof. This structure provided flexibility, allowing for regional autonomy, but it also bred instability. If a vassal state gained too much power or secured an independent source of wealth, it could sever ties with the federation. That moment arrived with the arrival of European traders, whose direct access to coastal markets upended the existing balance of power, shifting the economic focus toward the Atlantic and weakening Jolof's grip on its vassal states. Wallo, Kayor, Baol, Sine, and Saloum carved out their own spheres of influence, challenging Jolof's supremacy through warfare and shifting alliances, both with each other and with European traders seeking to exploit regional rivalries. To the south, the Kabu Empire, rising from the ashes of the once mighty Mali Empire, expanded aggressively, seizing control of key trade routes that had once strengthened Jolof's dominance. When the Portuguese first arrived on the West African coast in the 1440s, they did not immediately understand the political landscape. At first, they assumed that trade would function as it did in Europe, where a central authority controlled commerce and set fixed terms. But as they spent more time in the region, they observed something critical. The power of empires like Mali, Songhai, and Jolof depended entirely on tribute. The Portuguese realized that if they could bypass the rulers at the top and trade directly with vassals, They could destabilize entire kingdoms and gain direct access to Africa's wealth on their own terms. The first step in their strategy was to identify rivalries. They carefully studied conflicts between ruling elites and their governors, looking for vassals who were unhappy with their overlords. The Portuguese found that in the Jolof Empire, provinces like Caio and Beol had grown wealthy, but resented sending tribute to the Berber Jolof. They approached these rulers in secret, offering them something that could tip the balance of power: firearms. Firearms were the key. Up until this point, African warfare relied on swords, spears, and cavalry. Muskets and cannons could give any ruler an advantage over his rivals. Vassals who gained access to firearms quickly challenged their overlords, launching rebellions that broke empires apart. The second step in the Portuguese strategy was to create economic dependency. Once a ruler started trading with them, it became nearly impossible to stop. The first firearms were given as gifts or at low cost, but over time, African rulers had to pay for continued weapon shipments with captives. As European demand for enslaved labor increased, so did the price of weapons. The Portuguese adjusted their trade terms so that guns and gunpowder were only available in exchange for human lives. Some rulers resisted. The King of Caio initially refused to sell his own people and rejected Portuguese alcohol, fearing its corrupting influence. But resistance only worked for so long. If one ruler refused to engage in the trade, his neighbors, now armed with muskets, could attack and capture his people instead. Slowly, even reluctant states were pulled into the system. This was the final phase of the Portuguese strategy: make war inevitable. By the late 1500s, so many firearms had been introduced into Senegambia that no state could afford to be left behind. Rulers who once relied on tribute to maintain power now relied on war, raiding their neighbors and capturing prisoners to trade for more weapons. The Portuguese had discovered a perfect working strategy: find political divisions and exploit rivalries, supply vassals with firearms to destabilize larger empires, make rulers dependent on the slave trade to maintain power, to ensure a steady supply of captives. By the early 1600s, the Portuguese no longer needed to ask for captives. Wars were now being fought specifically to supply the European trade. The cycle had been set in motion, and soon other European powers, the Dutch, English, and French, would adopt the same strategy, competing for control over Africa's coastal trade, and encourage a continuous cycle of war. As Portuguese influence waned in Jolof, other European powers moved in to fill the void, while the Portuguese shifted their focus to the gold-rich Akan states, forging new trade relations with the Kingdom of Benin before ultimately expanding south to establish a stronghold in Angola. An estimated 800,000 enslaved Africans embarked from the Senegambia region between 1501 and 1875, transported by various European powers, including the Portuguese, British, French, and Dutch. The Portuguese departure from Senegambia did not bring peace. It simply shifted power to other European empires. As the Portuguese moved south, the Dutch, English, and French rushed to fill the vacuum, each seeking to dominate the transatlantic trade. The Dutch were the first to challenge Portuguese control, establishing forts along the Senegal River and capturing Gorée Island in 1617. By the mid-1600s, they controlled a significant portion of the region's trade, supplying enslaved people to the Dutch colonies in the Caribbean and South America. The English and French soon followed. The English established trading posts along the Gambia River, while the French focused on the Senegal River, building forts to secure their own networks. By the late 1600s, Senegambia had become a battleground for European powers, each backing different African factions to gain the upper hand. For the Wall of States, the shift from Portuguese to Dutch and French control did not improve conditions. If anything, the competition between European traders intensified local conflicts, leading to even greater numbers of captives being taken in wars. By the time the Portuguese moved east, the damage was already done. They didn't just trade, they restructured African politics, turned kings into merchants and rivals into enemies. The Jolof Empire, once a symbol of strength and order, was fractured by foreign influence, internal betrayal, and the lure of European goods. But what Portugal began in Senegambia was only a prototype. As they expanded down the coast, other European powers followed the trail they left behind, not with armies, but with bribes, weapons, and deals too dangerous to refuse. And deeper inland, powerful kingdoms like Ashanti, Oyo, and Benin were rising, strong, ambitious, and unaware of just how costly that power would become. In the next chapter, we follow the rise of Africa's most powerful slave trading states and the tragic trap that none of them saw coming. Thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue uncovering the hidden truths of history. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the past. See you in the next video.
Banna, sango, simba,